You know, when I look back and I think, don't you wish you could go back and be a teenager? I do. Man, I was smarter than anybody I knew because I was a teenager. Nobody knew anything. You know, I remember my parents. They were old, of course. I got called that the other day in teen class. Somebody called me grandpa, and I'm thinking, okay, whatever. Every gray hair and every missing hair comes with a lot of wisdom in his head. But I remember my parents were there old. They didn't understand anything that was happening to me right then, right down, at that point. They were kind of stuck in their old ways. They were living in the past. They didn't understand what it meant to be a young man in the new age. So I really didn't want any of their advice, though they gave it. But I didn't want the advice because I knew more. I knew better than they did. Besides that, I wanted something, I'd study about it, and I'd figure it out for myself. Especially those things that were important to me, right? So seriously, I really do wish I could go back and talk to my young teenage self and tell that teenage self to shut up and listen to my parents. I needed to listen to that advice. And unfortunately for me, it took a long time to learn that lesson. The lesson that I did not have any wisdom at all as a teenager. Probably up into my 20s. So I guess I was not wise or as wise as I thought. And looking back at wisdom wasn't really mine in my younger years, no matter how smart I thought I was. But the lack of willingness to search out wisdom caused me to make many, many bad choices in my young life that I really do wish I could go back and fix. The human race is that way. From Eden onward, the root of human tragedy lies in wrong choices. Seriously. My favorite theologian is very clear about those things. She writes this: man lost all because he chose to listen to the deceiver rather than to him who is truth, who alone has understanding. By the mingling of evil with good, his mind had become confused. How true is that? But do we understand wisdom, and do we understand how to get wisdom? When we get to Proverbs 1:7, Brooklyn, thank you for reading that. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And I look back and I'm thinking, man, I was a real fool as a teenager. But the book of Proverbs is all about helping us to make right choices, to make good decisions, to choose the way of God and not that of the deceiver. And then we look at our own homes and we begin to look at our upbringing. The father or the mother speaking to their child not only warns them against the wrong choices, but also encourages them to make the right ones. I wish they'd have encouraged me harder. But the first 3 chapters of Proverbs illustrate a method of education to know wisdom. And having laid down the ideas of the book, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? Knowledge. So the author moves back and forth from warning us against listening to foolishness to urging us to respond to the heavenly call for wisdom. But ultimately, it's our choice. So in Proverbs 1-6, Solomon is presented as a son seeking wisdom from God. So we have to ask ourselves some things. What is wisdom? What are we seeking? And then what is the fear of the Lord? And I'm hoping in Sabbath school you went over the fear of the Lord a little bit. But how do these two concepts relate to each other? How does what is wisdom and the fear of the Lord relate to one another? Because here wisdom is defined as a religious experience. It is the framework of the entire book of Proverbs. So apparently if we don't have wisdom, we are lost. You know, I was raised in a time years ago that our religious leaders thought, they thought that we should understand fear of what God was going to do to us if we did not obey. That was what they were looking to teach. It was I related to a lot like fear of my dad coming home after I messed up because my mother was going to tell him what I did and I was going to get a spanking when Dad got home. Because my mom realized real soon she couldn't spank hard enough to make it count. You can laugh. I was a hard kid. But I dreaded seeing my dad pull into the driveway because that was a moment of reckoning. When he pulled into the driveway, it was because it was time to meet the consequences of my actions, and it was going to leave a mark. And generally it did. But it was fear of being afraid of what was coming that was the problem. I should have been excited to see my loving father pull into the driveway because he'd been gone all day long. I should have been excited to see that, not afraid that he is here now. The fear of the Lord has nothing to do with superstitions. It has nothing to do with childish fear or divine punishment. That is not what the fear of the Lord is about. But the fear of the Lord had been characterized even all the way back to the people's time, the people's reaction, and the revelation of what God was doing at Sinai. It kind of started there. In Exodus 19, it says, "Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and thick cloud on the mountains. And all the sound of the trumpets was very loud, so all the people who were in the camp trembled." They were afraid. This is God. And apparently God was mad because there's thunders and lightnings. It's kind of like Dad pulling in the driveway and watching my mom and my dad talk, going, "Oh, there's some thunders and lightnings." But Deuteronomy straightens it up. Deuteronomy explains their commitment to be faithful. That's what God was asking them to do, is to commit to be faithful and to love God in response to the covenant that he had with them. So in Deuteronomy 10:12, it says, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Doesn't say anything about running from him or being fearful because he showed up. So in short, to fear God means to be faithful to God, to love God. So we come back to Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning. The love of God is the beginning. The faithfulness to God is the beginning of knowledge. But fools despise wisdom. You look at that word beginning and you begin to understand. Wisdom means that the wisdom originates out of the fear that we're supposed to have, the love, the compassion, the faithfulness. But the Hebrew word for beginning is be careful with this one, rashite. And if Dennis pronounced it wrong, it's his fault. But rashite points to the first word introducing the creation story. That word beginning takes you all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, where he points to the first words in Genesis 1:1. In Genesis 1:1 it says, in the beginning, in the Reshite, God created the heavens and the earth. So it's a starting point. So the first lesson of wisdom then deals with our understanding that God is our creator. The one who gives us life, he's the one that gives us breath, and he's always present. A God of love, not a God that's going to condemn us. He's a God of love, a God of justice, a God of redemption, not punishment. So Psalms 89:14 tells us righteousness and judgment, or righteousness and justice are the foundations of your throne. Mercy and truth go before your face. You guys remember being teenagers? It's an exciting time. You ever remember your mom and dad say, no, you shouldn't hang out with that crowd? Avoid this person, avoid that person. Hanging with the wrong crowd will get you in a lot of trouble, because if you get with the wrong group of kids that are doing all the wrong things, guess what you're going to start to do? All the wrong things. It's important. In Proverbs 1:8-15, we begin to see Solomon get that, instruction. It says, my son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be graceful ornaments on your head and chain about your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait and shed blood. Let us lurk secretly in the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol and whole like those who go down into the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. And then finally, my son, do not walk in the way of them. Keep your foot from their path. That was my mom and dad's plea. Did it always work? No. But it does tell us that first and foremost, education is a family matter. Wisdom begins in the home. True education comes from the first and foremost from the parents. And in these verses, the education is called instruction, even law. The Hebrew word for law or Torah means direction. Mom and dad are trying to give you direction. In contrast to other types of education, it's not really identified here. It's not even given a name. It simply acknowledges it as the voice of sinners which lead you in the wrong direction. So in his wisdom, the Lord has decreed that family shall be the greatest education that we can receive. So in the home is the education of the child, and the child is to begin his education from his mom and dad. So here's our first school. Here with our parents as instructors. Why? Because they have wisdom. For all you teenagers back here, parents have wisdom. They're to learn their lessons that are guide them through life without falling into the traps of all these other misdirections that they have. So the educational influence of the home are a deciding and a very powerful factor for good and evil. So if the child is not instructed right at home, Satan's going to educate him. Satan will educate him through the agencies of his choice, and it's going to be of the world, not of your home. That's how that education will happen. So the best argument on behalf of family education is its results. All you got to do is look at the child, and you can see how the child's been instructed at home. Most of the time. So these are the inner qualities of character. So the time spent with our children is going to be a much greater value than the time spent at our work, our job, or any place else. It's going to be with our children. We need to remember that. So what is the result of rejecting wisdom? The reason that people reject wisdom has nothing to do with wisdom itself. Did you know that? Has everything to do with the character of those who reject it. They're described as arrogant, disdainful. Proverbs 1:25 and 26 says, because you disdain all my counsel and would have none of my rebuke, I will laugh at your calamity. Some of you snicker. I got a kid sitting in the back, and when he wouldn't listen, I'd laugh and told you so. My boys hate to hear that. Because you wouldn't do those things I told you, I'm going to laugh at your calamity. And you kind of compare that with Proverbs 30 and 31. It says, but they would have none of my counsel. They despise my every rebuke. Therefore they shall eat at the fruit of their own way. You got yourself into this mess, get yourself out and see how that works out for you. And be filled with the fullness of their own fancies. Proverbs 1:29, because they hate knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord. That's important. So those who reject wisdom will reap the fruit of their rejection. Having refused to choose fear of the Lord, they are going to be content with themselves. Simple. They will be full of their own fancies, according to verse 31. So when we reject wisdom from above, we often end up with fables in our lives. We end up with lies in our lives. And if we do that, we fabricate them ourselves, or we have fables and lies that are fabricated for us, and we readily accept them because we rejected wisdom. So in this way, we replace God with idols instead. We end up having our own little idols in our own life. Ironically, those who despise religion, they mock and judge us Christians as simple and naive, are often superstitious in their own way. Think about that. They place value on the most fleeting and useless things that in the end is not going to affect their heart one way or the other. It's not going to satisfy the yearnings that they have in their own heart. Proverbs chapter 2, 1 through 6, it says, my son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So what are the conditions for understanding? Fear of the Lord. Simple. What choices do we have to make in the matter? You realize in this 3 times if is used. It marks 3 stages of progression of education. And here's what I found really interesting. The first introduces a passive stage of listening. That is simply being receptive and attentive to the words of wisdom from God. Just got to be able to receive them. Second is introducing the active response of crying out and asking for help from God. So many times we end up doing our own wisdom, takes us down the wrong path, and we're way down the path before we ever call out for God for his wisdom and his help. And third, the third if introduces passionate involvement in seeking and searching for wisdom as we would of a hidden treasure. And some of us are better looking for our lost keys than we are for the wisdom of God. So when we read Proverbs, we begin to understand some things. Verse 6-9 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And with that basis, he stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the path of justice. He preserves the way of the saints. Then you will understand the righteousness and the justice, equality, and every good path." Note the phrase, "the Lord gives." He gives it. It responds to the phrase of "you will find the knowledge of God." And the only way you're going to find it is if you're searching for it. To find something means that you're looking for it. And how many times do we not want to hear somebody else's advice? If we want their advice, we'd be looking for their advice. So wisdom, like salvation, is a gift from God. He gives it freely. As much as the first paragraph describes the human process, the paragraph describes divine work. It describes divine work. He gives wisdom, he stores wisdom, and he guards and preserves the way of the wise. So if you receive wisdom, he is going to guard and preserve your walk. And what happens when wisdom has finally found a home in the heart? It's simple. When wisdom enters into your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you, to deliver you from the way of evil. He promises you that. So when wisdom enters the heart, it marks a stage of what? Conversion. And if you look at Peter, when the rooster crows, Christ says, later you will be converted. It's wisdom that Peter needed. He needed to be wise with his words. He needed to search those things out. So it marks the final stage of conversion. Not only will we enjoy the knowledge of the Lord, but we will we'll have pleasant experiences within our souls. Our tribulations will be minimized. We'll also be protected from the evil way and from the seductions of evil. We will see it. We will walk the path of righteousness. So what is the first step of wickedness, though? Where does wickedness lead us? Proverbs 2:13 and 17, it says, "From those who leave the path of uprightness." To leave the path means you had to have been on the path. You notice that. To walk in the ways of darkness, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. Though we are sinners, we don't have to fall in evil. We don't have to follow that path. The ones depicted as on the wrong path must have first left the right path. You were on the good path. Wickedness then is understood first and foremost as a lack of faithfulness. Sin being quietly, innocently. That's how it begins. But before long, the sinner not only does wickedly, but actually begins to enjoy those wicked things. Think about that when you've fallen from God. What should it tell you about yourself? Heaven forbid if you enjoy doing evil. Or even worse, if you don't even deem evil anymore. What if you've lost sight of what's right and wrong? Proverbs 3:7, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. You know, to be wise in one's own eyes will lead to the illusion that one does not have to be wise in God. In other words, one doesn't have to need God. You don't need him. You're wise. There was times in my teens I didn't need mom and dad. I was wise. You guys laugh. I would not have wanted to be my parent. I moved out of the house when I was 16 years old because I was wise. That was the dumbest thing I ever did. To be wise in one's eyes will lead us to the illusion that you do not need God. And this is a hopeless situation. If you don't need God, there's no more hope for a fool than for them, according to Proverbs 26:12. So you lose hope. You lose all those things. Again, wisdom is described as a religious commitment, and if you don't have commitment, you're walking a fool's life. To be wise means to keep God's commandments. We learned that this morning. I heard it. I heard Terry talk about it. To display mercy and truth, and to trust in the Lord. If we're trusting in ourselves, we're trusting in the wrong person. So wisdom implies an intimate relationship with God. The question today is simple. Do you have it? Do you have it? Note the repeated reference to the heart, the seat of our personal response to God's influence. The heart was already mentioned in Proverbs 2:10 at the place where wisdom should begin, where wisdom should enter. It's a heart issue. Proverbs 13 through 18. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding, for her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all those who retain her. So when I read that, I get a flashback. I don't know if you guys ever get the flashback. Wisdom's associated with life and health. And one of the most suggestive images of the whole Bible is the tree of life. She is a tree of life. The promise is repeated several times in the book of Proverbs. The metaphor alludes to the Garden of Eden, and this promise does not mean that the obtained wisdom will provide eternal life, but instead it begins to mean something a little different. The idea is that the quality of life with God is better. When I moved out when I was 16 years old, I can tell you I lived above a gas station because an old gas station guy had a lot of pity on a stupid kid. I guarded the gas station for free because I had no money. My dad talked to him. My quality of life consisted of a foremost milk carton and a broken couch that stunk. That was life. Told you I was a hard-headed kid. Which our first parents enjoyed in Eden, though. They had a quality of life with God. It's a certain measure of that we can recover with wisdom in our own lives, no matter how short they are. We're not back in the garden, but there is a quality of life with God. So when we live with God, we get some hints of Eden. Even better, we learn hope. In the promised recovery of the lost kingdom, we begin to have hope. We have hope that it's coming again. And then in Daniel, we see this in Daniel. We talk about Daniel all the time. Daniel 7:18 says, "But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and promises the kingdom forever, even ever, forever and ever." That's hope. And I can tell you today, if you don't have that hope, you don't have wisdom. You haven't opened your heart to seek for it. Wisdom starts in the heart. If you're young, don't be like me. Listen to your parents. Listen to the adults around you, because they have your best interest in mind. Your friends do not. There's a phrase, the blind leading the blind. That was my friends. But with God, we see everything. With God, we have hope. With God, we have a quality of life. And if you haven't found him, you need to find him today. It is important, because it does have an impact on eternity. It does have an impact of our quality of life. It does bring wisdom to our life. So don't be afraid that God's coming. We can rejoice because he's a God of love. He's redeemed us, and he's giving us the free gift of wisdom. With that, keep that in mind today. Please stand.